you're listening to the Thrift Steading podcast, where we learn how to make the most of what we have so we can live simply, frugally, and to the glory of God. This is your host, Heather of Garnet Creek Farm, and today we are going to talk about how to get started with homesteading with barely any money. And be sure to stay to the end. I have a few giveaways to share at the end of today's episode. But first, I'd like to introduce you to today's sponsor, Legacy Wilderness Academy. The Legacy Wilderness Academy teaches Southerners how to harvest clean food and natural medicine from the wild plants that surround them every day. Through his in-depth courses, Matthew Hunter, gives valuable wisdom and instruction on how to harvest what you can locally in a clean and healthy manner. Be sure to stay to the end of today's podcast to hear how you can enter to win his online course, The Southerner's Guide to Foraging. My family and I have been working through this course, and it has highly valuable information. It has me taking notes, my kids taking notes, and it has me rehearsing with others what I am learning because I am so excited about what he has to share. What we're going to talk about today is how to get started with homesteading with barely any money. And this was definitely true for us. Basically, just getting the 13 acres that we have now, even that was a challenge. But we really believe that this is what God wanted for our family. And I remember praying about it and almost feeling guilty or selfish that I wanted to live on more than just the quarter acre that we were on at the time. But when I was praying, I just kept feeling like the prayers weren't selfish because it was for my children. It was something that would be passed on from generation to generation. And this wasn't about me, but it was about being able to provide what God had put in my heart for my children, and also what God had put in my husband's heart for his future and for what he wanted. And 17 years in, we are starting to see, well, more than just starting, we are definitely seeing the fruit of the labor that has been put in, but it's definitely been a hard road. And when I look at our property and I see that we have sufficient produce growing in our garden, we have a 90-foot greenhouse that we were able to purchase at an incredibly low price. And when I say greenhouse, and we can talk about greenhouses and hoop houses in another episode, essentially it's not the greenhouse that you might see in the movies with all glass, with flourishing plants growing up along the glass. It's more of a hoop house. If you Google that, you'll see what I'm talking about there. But it's 90 foot and we have banana trees, many tropical fruit trees growing in there, in addition to being able to start seeds about a month earlier than we normally would be able to if we were to just plant everything outside. And it has been a tremendous blessing for what we want to do. And like I said, I look around and I'm just amazed because not only are we able to provide for our family, but we are able to sell at farmers markets, and we have 2 retail places that we're able to sell some of our products. And I'm just seeing the benefits that God has given to our family, and I'm so thankful for the hard work that has gone into it, and that we're able to reap the benefits from what we have been doing over the years. That said, in the beginning, funds were tight, and even throughout the years, there was never an extreme surplus of funds to be able to use, to be able to go get the white picket fences and the red barn and everything that the storybook farm might look like. And before I get into how you can actually begin the homestead that you're dreaming of, I want to define what homesteading actually is. Because if you've been listening to what I've been saying the past couple minutes, you might have heard me interchange the word farm with homestead, which is extremely common, and we all do it. Those of us in the homesteading world, we definitely do it. But if we think about their difference, there is a stark difference between what homesteading is and farming is. You know, when you're driving down the highway and you see these acres and acres and hundreds of acres of farmland that is being used on a commercial scale, that's a farm. But when you might see 4, 5, 10, 20, 30 acres for one family or a compound of several families, that's a homestead. When you're providing what you need for those that live on the land, that is homesteading. And the traditional homesteading family that we all think of simply because Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote it down in a very detailed manner, uh, the Little House on the Prairie series can definitely show us what homesteading traditionally looked like. It obviously looks very different now in today's modern society, but the heart of it remains the same. When the Ingalls family, when all the families at that time period went out west, life was beginning to thrive on the East Coast, and people were able to have all the amenities that had come over from Europe. And you would think that those material possessions that they had wouldn't make them happy. The dresses, the bonnets, the ability to go to the store and buy flour, sugar, tea, and coffee whenever you wanted. You would think that that makes you happy, but it didn't. And for a lot of us, it doesn't. And we see the conveniences, but we also see the effects of those conveniences. And in the previous episode of Thrift Steading, I talked about how many homesteaders are homesteading because they have seen how the modern conveniences of this world have destroyed their health. And they want to fix their health, or they want to provide healthy alternatives for their children. And the goal of this podcast and Thrift Steading over on the Thrift Schooling blog is to provide you with the resources that you need so you can take these steps, and that so that we can encourage one another to take these steps, whatever those steps might be for you. What those steps are for you might be completely different than what they are for me, but I hope that what I learned over the years and those that contribute to this blog, throughout the month of August 2025, you're going to hear from many different speakers who are going to share with you what they have learned about the family milk cow, about why growing flowers on your homestead is important, or different ways to protect your homestead. And you're going to learn so many different ways to help you grow and strengthen your homestead, whether it's day 1 or year 21. And I am excited to just give you just a few tips today on how that can happen. So my first tip is, if you are looking for a property and maybe you're renting, maybe you have a small piece of land. We had maybe a quarter of an acre when we were looking. The best place to look would be the foreclosure section. For me, when we were looking 17 years ago, that literally was in the newspaper. I don't believe that's the case anymore. There are websites that you can find. Some of them you have to pay for, so I don't recommend, because they're kind of scam based resources, because they know a lot of people are trying to look on the foreclosed websites, and they kind of take advantage of that. But what you can do is you can go to Zillow and you can see which properties are foreclosed on, and then see which bank is going to be auctioning that off and utilize that information. And I have heard of many people who are looking for their first homestead, even if it isn't your forever home, even if it isn't what you're going to retire in eventually, getting just a few acres, getting a few bedrooms, getting what you need for your family, a kitchen, maybe 2 kitchens if you want to have canning, and maybe there's a mother-in-law suite already established. And that's the beauty of foreclosures, is you never know what you're going to find, because I feel terrible for the people who are unable to pay for these properties anymore, because they put their blood, sweat, and tears into these properties. So it is heartbreaking. But at the same time, you are able often to find a unique treasure, a diamond in the rough that you never would have been able to find. You might not have even known that that is what would have been perfect for you. So that is what works for many people who might not have the finances, who might not have, as much money as they would want for what they need for their family. Looking at those foreclosures and looking at those options. If in the meantime, if you are looking for that property and you still haven't found it, in the meantime, I highly recommend finding somebody who might have just a few extra acres or even a small plot of land that is attached to their property or even an extra property. They might not be willing to sell it and they might not ever. I'm not saying to go and ask them if you can have their property, but you can ask them if you can use part of their property. We had somebody do this where we live before they were able to get their soil up to where they wanted it to be. They lived a half hour away, but they still used part of our land because we had worked the soil and put lots of manure into it. We had access to a fishery, a hatchery, and we were able to get fish to work our soil Squanto style and put a lot of fish in there. And our soil was incredible. And so we were able to utilize that property, not only for our family, but another family was able to come until they were able to establish their homestead. I know of a family where they were in the city and their dream was to have a homestead. They eventually did get the homestead, but before that, they were able to have permission from the city to use a vacant lot across the street from them. They used pallets to completely block that entire property off, and they were able to use that land for growing their own food. And it was an incredible opportunity. Additionally, we know somebody where we were not able to keep all of our cattle on our property, but somebody has a second property that they just want to have constantly the grass, kept low. And so we rotate our cattle from our property to their property, and it is mutually beneficial because they don't have to worry about mowing their grass when they're not in town, and we can use their land. So think outside the box. Think about other people that you might be able to utilize their property until you receive what you have. I'm a firm believer that it's really hard to be a homesteader when you're a perfectionist. If you are a perfectionist, that will probably break when you become a homesteader, because when we have the perfectionist mindset, we just want everything to be storybook and perfect before we even begin. But I highly encourage you, if you're of that bent, to just try something new and see if maybe you could just borrow just a few acres of someone's land if you want to graze some cattle or have some sheep or whatever that dream is that you have, that you could utilize somebody else's property that maybe they've been really wanting somebody to come and use. Maybe they've really been wanting a family or a farmer to come and utilize their property, and maybe you are the answer. So I definitely would encourage you to just look at your different options. It doesn't have to be purchasing what you dream of first and foremost. And so this leads into the second way of how to have a thrifty homestead. This is my second point, where basically once you let people know you're homesteading, the resources come in. And I don't mean this in any way other than when people know what you are doing, people who have extra tend to want to give it to somebody who, or sell it at a decent price to somebody who could actually use it for what it was intended for. I mean, think about the older man who might have some farmland and they don't want there to be developers that come and develop that land. It's the same mindset, you know. There might be an old forge in somebody's garage that their grandfather used to do blacksmithing, and they just don't have the heart to sell it just to make money. They really want someone to use it. They find out that your son wants to learn how to use a forge, they might sell it to you for a great deal. And I've seen this time and time again. As soon as we had our greenhouse up, people were just giving us plants because they didn't have a greenhouse and they didn't want to have to deal with it anymore. And the thought of having a 90-foot greenhouse and then having to fill it was a little stressful because I just could not think of buying all the seeds or the corms or the bulbs or everything that I wanted. But they all came. They somehow came. And I'm not saying that you just need to be dependent on people giving you things all the time. That is definitely not what I'm saying. But when my daughter started raising rabbits, you know, she saved her money. She spent her money on rabbits. And then other people found out, oh, you actually have the cages. You're actually spending money on the feed. You are actually putting the work into it. I have some extra rabbits. Would you like them? So I have seen that type of thing happen again and again. And that happens in any industry, in homeschooling. You know, when somebody finds out you're homeschooling, they're going to call you and tell you they have extra homeschooling books. They're not going to go to their public school friend and tell them that. So it just makes sense. It's just how things work. But sometimes we forget that when we enter into a new hobby, a new lifestyle, you know, we sometimes don't know what we're entering into, and the fear of the unknown can consume us. But I just want to encourage you that there are so many people out there who are doing it, and they want to hold your hand and help you and show you where to go and how to do it and how you can get the resources so it can happen. And when you take that step of faith and buy your first rabbit, buy your first pig, it's scary because you don't know if a predator is going to come. It's going to be trial and error, and there are going to be tears, and there are going to be difficulties. And I'm definitely going to share in an upcoming episode, you know, about death on the homestead. I saw that on another podcast before where somebody talked about that, and I thought that was so important because it happens. Animals don't live forever. They have a much shorter lifespan, most of them do, than humans, and it's very difficult dealing with sickness and death on the homestead. It's hard. And, you know, for those of us who've even lost a child, whether stillbirth or miscarriage, you know, life is these challenges. We're not expecting them. You know, when we begin a pregnancy, we're expecting that everything is going to work out and that we're going to be able to walk them down the aisle when they're older. Well, not us, our spouse, but we have expectations, and a lot of times the Lord has different plans, but in all of it, he works all things together for the good of those who love him. And that's what I've learned in my 17 years of homeschooling and homesteading. And I am so excited to share with you so much of what I've learned throughout these years. And please comment, let me know what you want to learn about, whether it's having your first sourdough starter, whether it's having pigs on the homestead. If it's not something I have experience with, I will find somebody with that experience and bring them on so that they can share with you how you can make that happen. Because I believe God puts things in our hearts for our families, for us, and he will give us the tools and the resources that we need to make that happen for our families. So be sure to head over to thriftschooling.com and check the Thrift Steading tab for all of the giveaways during the month of August 2025. The Southerner's Guide to Foraging, provided by Mr. Matthew Hunter. That is one of our incredible giveaways. You will be able to learn how to forage in your area and find what you need so you can fill your medicine cabinets, you can fill your pantries, and you can have what you need just from your own backyard.